Hello everybody, how are you? I'm fine, thanks to God. So in today's particular presentation, I'm going to share you some important and the most dynamic feature in PLC. So I think this is a presentation or tutorial number 3, especially on PLC. So in the first tutorial, we've seen the basics of PLC. In the second part, we've seen the two important terms which determine the size of the PLC. So in terms of memory and in terms of I/O module, which is input-output module. So those two input-output module and the memory categorize the given PLC into three main groups. So depending upon these two items, PLCs may be small size, medium size, and large size. So according to that, we see the very important concept is each and individual item, what parameters are must be important in order to say the given PLC medium size, small size, and large size in terms of memory and I/O devices. So that is especially focused on the covered in the slide number 2. I think it is tutorial number 2. So go back and check my YouTube channel in order to get that information. So in today's presentation, I'm gonna show you about the major components of PLC. So before I'm gonna start the presentation to all of you, we'll see about the structure generally. So the physical structures, the physical kinematics, which is very important in order to build a given PLC. So you can see this processor, which is said to be a central processing unit. So central processing unit with a memory with a random access memory and a read-only memory, or in other sense a RAM and a ROM with CPU is very important with this. So CPU is central processor. So the processor includes CPU and the memory. The memory we have random access memory and read-only memory. So those two items are categorized under this processor. The next thing is a power supply. So we have to know about power supply, which is a very important concept. When you are a power engineer, you basically focused on this power supply. So this power supply is very important. So we have to work on this power supply. During that time, we need to implement or we need to supply only 24 volt DC. So at that moment, we have to consider the power conversion devices such as rectifier, inverter, diode, chopper, and cycler converter devices. Those are very important in order to convert the AC power, the continuous AC power into continuous DC power, or from the ripple DC power to continuous AC power, DC power. So during the power supplying case, we need to have those devices in electronics case, whereas in the physical power conversion is time mechanism with the transformers. So transformers are very important in order to step down the power supply into a DC. So those are especially the coils, but the coils have two ports. We have a starting point and the ending point. So those starting point gonna supply the main power, and which deliver the diminished or the decreased power supply or the converted power supply in terms of in the form of DC 24 volt with this power supplying mechanism by the help of transformer, which is basically in a power case. But in electronics case, we need to consider those 4 power controlling devices and power converting systems. So the first thing is a rectifier, we have inverter, we have the cycler converter, and we have a chopper. So chopper is in order to convert a DC, now a ripple DC power to a continuous DC power. So we have to consider, we have to remind, we have to go back and repair our lessons, especially when we think about the power supply. Power is not randomly supplied for these PLC systems. When we supply random volt, which is AC, AC, single phase and three phase directly to this processor, we completely burn our system, so which is completely burned and damaged. So we must care when we supply power for PLCs physically. So PLCs looks like such kind of shapes, which is my mobile, so which looks like this, as you can see from my hand. So there are ports here at the top, and we have another port at the bottom, and here we have a PLC indicating items at the left and the right corner. So these are the very important components. Later, after the end of this presentation, I make sure I will share you the physical configuration of the PLC for the industrial as well as the automation system. So that is the power supply mechanism. The other thing is programming devices. So programming device is very important, by the way. When you build when we think about the components of PLC, these programming devices are nothing which are our computers. So our computers uses as a device in order to program the system before we're gonna implement the algorithm for the processor. So we need personal computer PC, which is so-called very applicable, not trial version, very applicable practical software. That are the programming devices. The other thing is the input module. As you can see from this slide, the input module is also a very important component in order to sense the input signals. So the input module is always sense the input signals. So the input signals are from sensors. Those sensors are also implemented with such kind of physical devices, as you can see from here. The sensor signals came from push button, from switches, from limited switches, from photoelectric, from conditions like contactors, and not contactor, from different conditions, as well as from the sensors, so-called proximity sensor, which is nearby device, and temperature sensors. So these input modules are in order to gather information from these sensors, and that sensor also send the signal from the processor. The processor is finally send the signal in order to perform a given task for the output, as you can see from here, which is an output module. That output will produce the real system. So the very important thing we have to consider in here is, in order to make some change from the input, from the beginning up to the end. This point is the beginning point. We need to have an output. That output must perform a given task for our devices, for our systems, for our industries. That is output. So the output is in order to actuate or in order to deactivate the system, in order to activate or in order to deactivate the system. So this is a very important and a fundamental concept we have to understand in our configuration. So those outputs are maybe solenoids in order to actuate or deactivate, in order to open and close. That is a contactors, as you can see from here. Contactors are a physical device, which is an electrical device, in order to normally open and normally close the device by sensing from sensing devices, or by detecting from the input signal. So these are a contactor. Alarm in order to boost a sound. Alarm and horn are especially. This alarm is for the non-movable stationary devices, but horns are basically for vehicles and for other automated systems. Valves in order to actuate. Printers, as you can use for office application. Pumps for absorbing a given system, a given liquid